It lay between the seats in a narrow, dark crevice, as if caught in a trap. A small blue rectangle that decided who you would become tomorrow. A successful person with a future in New York, or a nobody who had missed the biggest chance of their entire life. The kind of chance that comes around once in a century. Only 12 minutes remained before the registration counter for the Paris-New York flight closed. The security officer at Charles de Gaulle Airport already had his hand on the button that would permanently block access to the plane. At that exact moment, on the platform next to my white van with the words "Przemyśl to Paris" written on it, a real human drama was unfolding, making the blood run cold. A girl was on her knees in the middle of the dirty asphalt, her belongings scattered all around her, gasping for air, unable to even cry out in despair. She had lost the one thing without which her life no longer made any sense. But to understand how we ended up at this point of no return, we need to go back 30 hours, to when the wheels of my minibus had just crossed the borderline in Przemyśl. The E40 highway at this time of day always lived its own special, monotonous life. For me, this route had long since become a second home. The strip of asphalt fading into the horizon, the flash of road signs, the hum of the engine, and the quiet chatter of passengers behind my back. This was my familiar world, where everything usually went according to a precisely calculated schedule. I loved my job for this very predictability. I knew every gas station in Poland, every turn on the German autobahns, and every spot where I could get a strong coffee to drive away the night's sleep. Yet experience told me, international trips are a lottery. You never know who will step into your cabin and what kind of story will unfold right before your eyes over the next 2,000 kilometers. This time the passengers were a mixed crowd. An elderly couple going to visit their grandchildren, 2 migrant workers with tired eyes, a young student with headphones who immediately fell asleep with his forehead pressed against the glass. And then there was her, Elena. I noticed her the moment she boarded in Przemyśl. The girl is holding a small leather purse so tightly, as if all the treasures of the world were inside it. Her fingers trembled as she handed her ticket to me, and her eyes shone with a strange, almost feverish light. This wasn't ordinary travel anxiety. It was the long-awaited, hard-earned excitement of a person standing just one step away from fulfilling their greatest dream. When the van finally set off and hit the highway, Elena didn't sleep. She stared out the window, watching the darkness slowly swallow the Polish countryside, occasionally pulling a mobile phone from her pocket to check the time. Somewhere in the middle of the night, when the cabin had sunk into a deep sleep and my co-driver had gone to rest on the back seat, the girl suddenly started talking to me. She simply needed to speak out loud, so as to not go crazy from the internal pressure. "You know," she began quietly, looking at the glowing dashboard, "I still can't believe this is happening to me. I lived in hell for 3 years. I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a day, and denied myself absolutely everything. My friends went to restaurants, bought clothes, and built relationships. And I drew. I drew architectural projects, drafted until my fingers blistered, and sent hundreds of portfolios to different corners of the planet. And everywhere I got rejections. Thousands of standard emails with the text, 'Thank you for your interest, but you are not a match for us.' My parents told me to drop this nonsense, get a normal office job, and stop making up fairy tales." She took a short pause, and a note of pride appeared in her voice. "And 2 weeks ago, I got a call from New York, one of the largest architectural firms in the world. They saw my project for an ecological skyscraper that I had been developing at night. They didn't just praise it, they offered me a full internship with a subsequent contract. They opened a work visa for me and paid for the flight. But the flight is only from Paris. This is my only ticket to the future, do you understand? If I am even a minute late, if the plane leaves without me, there won't be another chance. The contract will be canceled automatically because hundreds of applicants from all over the world are standing in line for my spot. My whole life right now depends on how fast we get to Charles de Gaulle Airport." I listened to her very carefully. I had seen many people in my van, but such fierce determination and sincerity were striking. "Don't worry, Olena," I replied calmly, tightening my grip on the steering wheel. "The road is my element. Our schedule is calculated down to the smallest detail. If there are no surprises at the borders, we will arrive in Paris 2.5 hours before your flight. You'll have plenty of time to quietly enjoy a croissant and coffee in the terminal." These words calmed the girl down a bit. She leaned back in her seat and, it seemed, for the first time in a long while, closed her eyes, allowing herself to rest a little. The van flew forward confidently, cutting through the night fog of the German autobahns. The E40 highway was kind to us. The vehicle passed kilometer after kilometer without any trouble. But the road is a living organism, and it has its own character, which often likes to test people's strength at the most inconvenient moment. When we were about 150 kilometers away from Paris, morning had fully taken over. The sky was overcast with gray clouds, and a fine, unpleasant rain began to fall. Suddenly, the navigator on the dashboard flashed red. Ahead, right at the entrance to the suburban zone of the French capital, a massive traffic jam had formed. A huge semi-truck had flipped across 3 lanes of traffic, completely blocking the highway. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the clock. Time began to melt away with incredible speed. Instead of an open autobahn, we were caught in a steel trap of thousands of vehicles standing motionless. The passengers in the cabin began to wake up and whisper anxiously. Alina instantly bolted up from her seat. Her face went pale. "What happened? Why are we standing still?" Panic echoed in her voice. "An accident ahead, Alina. Stay calm. I'll try to find a detour through the secondary roads." I tried to speak as confidently as possible, though everything inside me tightened with tension. I began turning the wheel, moving into the far right lane to exit onto a narrow regional road. This was a massive risk. The rural roads of France are not designed for fast driving. There are countless sharp turns, traffic lights, and speed limits. But staying on the Autobahn meant a guaranteed delay. The next 2 hours turned into a real race for survival. I squeezed everything possible out of the van, balancing on the edge of traffic regulations and safety. The passengers silently held on to the handrails, understanding exactly what stakes were on the line. Elena did not take her eyes off the clock. Every minute of delay at a red light brought quiet tears to her eyes, which she hurriedly wiped away with her fist. When we finally broke through to the home stretch leading to Charles de Gaulle Airport, the situation had become critical. Instead of the planned 2-hour buffer, we had only 20 minutes left until the registration counter for international flights closed for good. 20 minutes to drive into the gigantic airport complex, find the right terminal, drop off the passenger, and for her to run to the counter. I switched on the hazard lights, skillfully cut off a taxi near the departure zone, and with a screech of brakes, stopped the minibus right in front of the sliding glass doors of Terminal 2E. "Olena, run! You don't have much time. Go straight, then turn right," I shouted, opening the side door of the cabin. The girl, like a wound-up spring, leaped from her seat. She didn't even take her large suitcase, as she was flying with only carry-on luggage, that same small leather purse and a backpack. Thank you so much," she shouted on the run, her eyes filled with frantic hope. She dashed through the sliding doors of the airport with a confident stride and vanished into the crowd. I took a heavy breath, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and leaned against the steering wheel. My hands were visibly shaking after 2 hours of extreme driving. She made it. Thank God she made it, I thought, feeling an incredible wave of relief. Other passengers in the cabin smiled too, and someone even patted me on the shoulder. "Well, you're a master, brother. You saved the trip." But that relief lasted for exactly 30 seconds. Suddenly, the side doors of the airport burst open again. Elena didn't just run out, she flew out. But this was no longer the purposeful girl who had walked confidently toward her dream just a few minutes ago. This was a person whose world had shattered in a single second. Her face was white as a sheet, her eyes wild, dilated with unutterable terror. She ran back toward the van, noticing nothing around her, tripped over the curb, and fell straight onto the asphalt, spilling the contents of her backpack. I instantly jumped out of the cab. "Elena, what happened? Was the flight delayed?" The girl raised her eyes to me, full of tears, and her voice broke into a scream that shattered the piece of the platform. "The passport! My passport! It's gone! They won't let me register!" Those words sounded like a death sentence. Without a passport containing the American visa, she wasn't just unable to fly to New York, she was nobody in this foreign country. "What do you mean, gone?" I felt the cold grip in my own chest. "You were holding it in your hands." "I don't know. I walked up to the counter, opened my bag, and it wasn't there. I searched everything. It's nowhere. I lost it. I lost everything." The girl began frantically gathering her scattered things from the asphalt, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't even hold her phone. 12 minutes remained until registration closed. The chances were melting away with every second. A wave of panic instantly swept through the van's cabin. The passengers, who had just been celebrating a victory, jumped up from their seats. My co-driver turned on a flashlight, even though it was daytime outside, and rushed to search the cabin. They checked every magazine net, every gap between the seats. They completely searched the spot where Alina had been sitting. Empty. Absolutely empty. The passport was nowhere to be found. "Alina, calm down for just 1 second," I said loudly, taking her by the shoulders and forcing her to look into my eyes. "Remember, where were you holding it last? At the gas station? At the border?" I was filling out the customs declaration on the table when we were already approaching Paris," she recalled through her tears. "I was definitely holding it in my hands. Then I put it back in my bag. Or maybe not, I don't know. I don't remember anything. Everything is a blur." Time was marching on relentlessly. 11 minutes, 10 minutes. Every second was worth its weight in gold. If the passport was in the cabin, it had to be found immediately. But where? We had already checked the entire seat. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to push aside the panic and engage the cold logic of an experienced driver. Alina had been sitting in the front passenger seat, right next to my driver's seat. Beside that seat, there is a plastic central console where the gear shift is located. And between the seat itself and the plastic, there is a very narrow, almost unnoticeable gap where small coins or pens often drop. I rushed into the cab. I fell to my knees right on the floor mat and slid my hand into that narrow, dark gap under the seat. The plastic cut the skin on my fingers. I couldn't see anything and was acting purely by touch. First, my fingers felt an old receipt, then a plastic bottle cap. Time was running out. 9 minutes. "Come on, where are you?" I whispered, pushing my hand even deeper until my knuckles cracked from the strain. And suddenly the tips of my fingers brushed against something smooth, thick, and leather-bound. It was a cover. I pulled the object toward me with force. The plastic of the console flexed with a crack, scratching my hand until it bled, but I paid no attention to it. I yanked my hand back out. In my bloody palm was the blue passport of Ukraine. It had simply slipped from Alina's hands when my van turned sharply on the rural road while bypassing the traffic jam, and had flown right into that cursed gap like a trap. "Got it! I found it!" I shouted across the whole airport. I jumped out of the vehicle, holding the passport up like a trophy. Alina, seeing the document, let out a sound like a gasp of relief and reached to grab it, but I caught her hand. "No, Alina, you'll just drop it again or fall over from the anxiety. There are 8 minutes on the clock. We run together," I commanded, and we ran. Those were the longest hundreds of meters in my life. Me in a stained road jacket with a hand bleeding onto my palm, and a young girl in an unbuttoned coat raced through the vast hall of the Charles de Gaulle terminal, which was packed with foreign tourists. People stepped aside, staring at our mad pair. The navigation boards flashed overhead. Registration counters 10 to 14. We flew there, paying no attention to our breathlessness or the pain in our legs. There it was, the right counter. The security officer already had his hand on the ribbon, about to lower the barrier, and the airport worker at the computer was already pressing the key to close the flight. "Stop! Wait, please!" I shouted in English across the whole hall, breathing heavily. The French officer looked at us sternly and pointed to his watch. "Registration is over. The system closes automatically in 40 seconds. You are late." "No, I beg of you." Alina rushed to the counter, her voice trembling and tears pouring from her eyes again. But this time, they were tears of final hope. "My passport fell in the car. We were looking for it. This is my internship, my life. Please, just 1 second." I stepped closer, inch by inch, laid the blue passport on the counter next to my bleeding hand, and looked quietly but very firmly into the eyes of the airport worker. "Please, madame. She has been walking toward this plane for 3 years. Don't let one silly accident destroy a dream." An absolute silence hung over the hall. The French woman at the computer shifted her gaze from my bloodied hand to Elena's tear-stained face. On the monitor screen, the timer blinked. 30 seconds until the system locked completely. She hesitated for only a brief moment, and then her fingers began typing furiously across the keyboard. "Give me the passport, quick," she said shortly. 20 seconds later, with a characteristic whirring sound, a long slip of paper crawled out of the machine. the boarding pass for the flight to New York. The airport worker tore it off, smiled, and handed it to Alina. "Have a nice flight to the United States, miss. Run to the gate, you have very little time." Alina took the pass and the passport. She looked at those two pieces of paper as if she were holding the keys to paradise. Then she turned to me, threw her arms around my neck with all her might, leaving traces of tears on my jacket. "I will never forget you, never in my life. You saved me." "Fly, Alina, and build your skyscraper," I replied quietly, smiling through the exhaustion. She bolted toward the customs control zone, waving her hand on the run. I stood and watched her go until her bright coat finally vanished around the corner of the corridor. Only then did I feel how badly my hand hurt, with blood still dripping onto the polished floor of the Paris airport. I pulled a tissue from my pocket, wrapped it around my fingers, and with a slow, tired, but incredibly happy step, walked back to my van. I was returning to the passengers who were waiting for me, to my familiar E40 highway, to the monotonous hum of the wheels. This trip was over. Ahead lay the road back to Przemysl. I knew that over the years of work there would be many more passengers and many different stories ahead. But this day and those 40 seconds that decided the fate of one girl, I will never forget. Because my job isn't just about spinning a steering wheel from point A to point B. My job is about being right there exactly when someone's life hangs by a thread and helping them take that single, decisive step toward their dream.